Hello. Welcome to This Evening with Naomi Wolf. This lecture has been selected to be recorded for Chicago Amplified, a web-based audio program produced by WBEZ Chicago that captures some of the most exciting and informative cultural programming in the Chicago area. In your printed program, you'll find out how you can hear this lecture again or share it with others through Chicago Amplified. At this time, I'd like to ask that you please make sure your cell phones are turned off. And now I'd also like to introduce the president of Elmhurst College, Dr. S. Allen Ray. Thank you.
Welcome to Elmhurst College, and welcome to the fifth lecture in this year's Democracy Forum. The Democracy Forum is a new series of discussions and cultural events that take place throughout the academic year in the college. They explore the theme of democracy and civic engagement. The forum focuses on the forces that inspire and inhibit our involvement as members of a larger community. The lectures intend to shine a light on issues of access to higher education, to information, to economic and political opportunity, and to consider their impact on the promise of democracy. Previous speakers in this year's Democracy Forum were Chavez Bishop lecturer Gary Chico, critical sociologist and minister Michael Eric Dyson, legal scholar and author Jeffrey Toobin, and historian and political commentator John Meacham. On Sunday evening, November 6th at 7 p.m. in this chapel, we'll host our final Democracy Forum speaker of the fall season, U.S. Senator Mark Kirk, who will address us on the meaning of democracy and civic engagement. I hope you'll plan to join us for what I'm sure will be a fascinating evening. Tonight's Democracy Forum brings to our campus an outstanding and fascinating public intellectual, the feminist social critic, activist, and author, Naomi Wolf. To introduce Ms. Wolf, I'm pleased to give you Dr. Mary Walsh, Professor of Political Science at Elmhurst College. Dr. Walsh teaches and conducts research in the areas of ancient, modern, and postmodern political philosophy, early American political theory, feminist political theory, and political justice. Dr. Walsh.
I am deeply honored to introduce Naomi Wolf to you tonight. An author, social critic, and political activist, Naomi Wolf raises awareness of pervasive inequalities that exist in society and politics. She encourages people to examine their lives, voice their concerns, and enact change. Ms. Wolf's landmark international bestseller, The Beauty Myth, challenged the cosmetics industry and the marketing of unrealistic standards to women, launching a new wave of feminism in the early 1990s. The New York Times called this book one of the most important books of the 20th century. Her next book, Vagina, A Cultural History, will be released in 2012. Ms. Wolf's New York Times bestseller, The End of America, A Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot, is an impassioned call for a return to the principles of constitutional democracy and to the aspirations and beliefs of our founders. The New York Times called the documentary version potentially inflammatory. Her latest book, Give Me Liberty, A Handbook for American Revolutionary, offers strategies for effective civic engagement and strategies for creating sustainable democracy. Her international journalism includes the investigative report, Guantanamo Bay, the Inside Story for the Times of London. And as a columnist for Project Syndicate, her articles have been published in India, the Philippines, Egypt, and Lebanon. A graduate of Yale and a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, Wolf was a consultant on Al Gore's presidential campaign, offering advice on women's issues and social policy. She is co-founder of the Woodhull Institute for Ethical Leadership, an organization that teaches leadership to women, and also the American Freedom Campaign, a grassroots democracy movement in the United States. it is particularly fitting for Wolf to be here as part of Elmhurst College's Democracy Forum. Please join me in welcoming Naomi Wolf.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. Please sit down. I love it that I got, a tiny little ovation there, even before I've said anything, so we can all just go have a drink now. No, I will actually give you a lecture, but thank you very much. I am a pacer, and I like to pace around. Is there a handheld mic, or if not, can you hear me if I speak like this? No, all right, no problem, no problem. Oh, can I have that? Is it on? Wonderful, perfect, thank you so much. So I'm so honored and happy to be here at Elmhurst College for a lot of reasons, but the biggest one is that I've spent the day with the students, with some of the students and faculty, and I feel empowered and inspired and almost moved to tears, and a lot better than I felt yesterday when I was getting used to being out of the big house. I'll tell you what that means in a minute. The students I've met here are thinking so hard and so well about social justice, social responsibility, leadership, the idealism that is the historic legacy of this college is clearly so much part of the teaching and the learning here. So thank you for your warm welcome and for letting me meet these incredible young people, and I hope I have a chance to meet more of you after the lecture. And thank you also for opening this event to the public, because that's what civil society is all about. Thank you, Elmhurst College. So, Tuesday night, I was in jail. And, it does seem like strangely useful timing that I'm talking to you about our roles and responsibilities as Americans as I'm just sort of getting used to recovering from the experience of having been arrested for walking lawfully on the sidewalk with my partner outside of an event to which we'd been invited in an evening dress. But I will tell you the story, and then I'll tell you what it means and why things like this are tipping points for all of us, and what we need to do about it. 2 nights ago, my boyfriend and I were guests at the Huffington Post's Changemakers Gala, this fancy thing down on Hudson Street in Manhattan. And we were all dressed up, and we were going into the event, and outside of the event, there were maybe 30 or 50 protesters from the Occupy Wall Street movement, and they were laboriously using the human microphone method. Do you know what that is? Yeah, is it okay if I pace down like this? Is this all right too? Thank you. Such friendly faces, I just want to get closer. It's when someone says something and everyone has to repeat it, and they do this, it's a very kind of Stone Age technique. They do this because they've been told that they're not allowed to use a megaphone. Well, in 2008, I was writing a book called Give Me Liberty, which was a sequel to my book, The End of America. The End of America is about the closing of an open society, which I'll tell you about in this lecture, and people said, we get it, that our liberties are being eroded, what do we do? So I set out to study, how do you protect a democracy? How do you open up a democracy again? And I looked at all kinds of times and places where people had successfully pushed back. And I learned that the number one thing that was effective, most effective, in a closed or closing society, meaning a tyranny, right, whether it's on the left or the right, is protest. But not just any protest. Protest in which business as usual is disrupted. Okay? And I don't mean violent protest. I'm actually very much opposed to violent protest. That's why I've been saying to the Occupy Wall Street people on my Facebook page, don't march. Marching is a kind of quasi-militarist framing of the act of protest and dissent. Sit down. Sit. Sit in the street if you can. Sit peacefully. It's much harder to escalate a situation if you're seated. Don't chant. Chanting is this kind of reptile brain, rah-rah, again, quasi-militaristic, revved-up thing. Sing. The great movements that have been successful, believe it or not, have involved singing. It uplifts, it inspires, it draws people. You get worn out chanting. And there are other important strategies of successful protest that I had studied and written about. But the reason that I knew that the Occupy Wall Street people outside of this gala event were wearing themselves out wrongly by using their voices instead of a megaphone is that in 2008 I had tried to read the Constitution of the United States in Union Square to see what would happen, right? I was trying to exercise my rights as a citizen, and I realized within 5 minutes that what I was doing was illegal. Why was it illegal? Then this incredible journey unfolded that seems really unsexy because it's about permits, but it's incredibly important. I discovered that 30 and 40 years ago, America was swept with a wave of very effective protest. Remember that? The moratorium against the war, farm workers engaging in protest, women marching down Fifth Avenue, gay rights protests, anti-war protests, free speech protests, the park in Berkeley, which was a site of protest. Everywhere you looked, people were gathering in large numbers in the street, in public spaces, and engaging in dissent. This was really, really effective. And it brought in a tremendous amount of change. Upheaval, yes. Excess sometimes too, because they were not always disciplined. But tremendous change. Well, the entrenched powers that be in this country got what happened, and they figured out a solution. And it was very, very sneaky. So I discovered that for the last 30 years, even though we technically have a First Amendment, and what the First Amendment tells us, and it comes first because it's the most important amendment on which everything else is based, is it says, Congress shall pass no law abridging freedom of speech or the right of the people peacefully to assemble to petition government for redress of grievances. Right? Powerful words. You can say what you need to say. You can gather with your neighbors. You can go to public spaces and demand accountability of your elected representatives. That's what the First Amendment means. So we have that. Right, it comes first. But sneakily, what did the powers that be do in municipalities across the country, including this one? All of Illinois, and certainly Chicago and the outskirts of Chicago, Illinois. They passed quietly and stealthily, sneaky, permit laws that chipped away, restricted people's actual practical ability to exert their First Amendment rights. So I don't know what they are in Chicago, but I'm sure the people at Occupy Chicago are running into them. But I can tell you that in Texas, they're being told, if you want to protest here, that's fine, but it'll cost you $600 if we arrest you. And in Zuccotti Park in Manhattan, they're being told, it's fine for you to protest here, but it's pouring rain, and you can't put a tarp over your head. And, you know, you can't, I'm sorry. In other places, people are being told, well, okay, you can protest, but you need a permit to go from here to here. And if you step into the street, you'll get arrested. And so all over the country, there's this network of sneaky permits. In Manhattan, in my local park, Washington Square, which was, by the way, the site of some of the great protests in New York history, as well as Union Square, Those protests now that changed American history are illegal. Okay? In Washington Square, there's a little sign that says, you may not rally without a permit. So then I thought, well, how do I get a permit? So I followed the process with the mayor's office, and I discovered that the process of getting a permit to rally is completely arbitrary and opaque. And, oh, the fine print. The mayor's office can decide if they want to give you a permit at all. And if they don't give you one, you never know why, and there's no recourse. So, do we have First Amendment rights in New York City? Technically, but can we exercise them? That's exactly right. So this is a very big deal. You know, the Huffington Post called me a permit nerd, which I thought was very funny, affectionately, I think. And I think that's right, because it seems so boring, but it's so fundamental to our lives, you know, our very lifeblood as American citizens, and sneaky, sneaky, sneaky behind the scenes. So I approached this group of protesters, and I told them, look, you really should look into this thing about no megaphones, because the permit process is corrupt and not transparent, and I think you should use a megaphone and, you know, let the National Lawyers Guild fight the case, because it's based on this faulty premise that they get to pass these sneaky permits. And then my boyfriend sensibly suggested that we ask the protesters what their demands were. And I did, and they gave me several requests or demands, all of them very reasonable, ranging from they were upset that Governor Cuomo had rolled back a tax on millionaires so that millionaires weren't paying fair tax. They were worried about fracking, which is putting toxic chemicals into our upstate New York water supply. And they wanted accountability for police brutality in Manhattan, which they'd experienced. Are these radical, scary, you know, tear down the house kinds of requests? No. So I wrote them all down, and I was going into the event, and the governor would be there, so I thought, if I get a chance to chat with him, I'll pass on this note, right? Because what do you do in a democracy? In a real democracy, he's their governor. They're his boss in a real democracy, right? So the guy who works for them needs to know what his employers want. That's how a democracy works. So I went inside with my boyfriend, and we mingled, and we hung out with our friends. And the governor didn't show up for quite a while, and I had another commitment, so we left. As we came out, we saw that these protesters had been moved across the street, 2 lanes of traffic, to the far side of the street, and were sort of backed up against the opposite wall on the opposite sidewalk with a phalanx of blue uniformed New York Police Department police between them and the event. So this troubled me, because in my study of protest, one thing for sure I've learned is that protest is completely ineffectual if it's removed from the thing it's protesting, right? There's a very famous thing called the bonus march, which many of you, if you're older, know about or have heard stories about, where people in the Depression who hadn't received their bonuses for, I believe, fighting in the war, camped out in Washington, D.C. for months. And they sat on the steps of Congress, because at that time you were allowed to do that, for months, so that they could look their congresspeople in the eye when those congressmen passed and went in to legislate, are these poor men with their families who were promised bonuses not going to be given their bonuses? They had to pass them, and it took a long time and a lot of struggle, but those impoverished men finally got their bonuses, and they went home and they fed their families. That's what protest does in America when it's working the way that it should, or anywhere in the world. So when you move people away from the site, or you enclose them in barricades, which is called kettling in Britain, it's happening all over the world, or you tell them they can go from here to here but nowhere else, you're basically creating impotent or neutered protest. It's fake protest. It does nothing. So I went up to the people who were pushed against the wall and said, what happened? And they said, Well, the police told us that the permit that the event holders have forbids us to march on the sidewalk near the event. From my nerdy study of permits, I knew that that was impossible. No such thing. In New York City, a private entity cannot lease the sidewalks. I'd be very surprised if they could lease the sidewalks in Chicago, right? So I'm a reporter, so I asked the police, is this the case? And one police officer said, yes, the event holders have control of the sidewalks. Their permit gives them control of the sidewalks for several hours. And I thought, well, that sounds really weird. That's not possible. I went back to the other side of the street and asked around, and someone connected with the event said, I've seen the permit, and in fact, it does give you the right to walk up and down on the sidewalk if you don't obstruct traffic, foot traffic. Great. Ran across the street. I said, it's legal. I checked the permit. Arron, my boyfriend, and I are going to cross the street because we believe in the First Amendment. We're going to walk up and down the street. And if any of you want to walk up and down the street with us, it is legal. Please join us. About a dozen people crossed the street, and we were literally, like musical chairs, peacefully, arm in arm. I was arm in arm with Arron. People were single file, walking up, turning around, walking, 12 feet on either side to pass, no obstruction, peaceful, strolling. At that point, 30 or 40 white-shirted, very big, very fit, senior New York City officers appeared as if out of nowhere. They hadn't been there before, as if a van had pulled up, or many vans, and released them. And they surrounded us. And one officer with a megaphone, remember the citizens of New York are told they must not use megaphones, took out his megaphone and shouted, you are ordered to disperse, you are creating an illegal obstruction. So I wasn't trying to be difficult. I wasn't. I just knew that that was not correct. And so since, I believe in peaceful protest, and since I've been haranguing people about being peaceful and respectful to the police, I moved, you'll see this in the video, which I gather has gone viral. I moved very slowly toward the officer with the megaphone, and very peacefully and in a tone of great respect and stillness and courtesy, I said, officer, and I identified myself, and I said, I am confused. I've checked the permit, and I understand that it is legal for us to march if we do not obstruct foot traffic, and as you see, there's no obstruction. He shouted, will you get out of my way? And I was shocked and froze, and he shouted, will you back down? And honestly, I didn't choose to not obey him. Something very extraordinary happened to me at that moment. Yeah. I literally felt that I couldn't move. And it wasn't like conscious reasoning, but I felt like if I moved and fell back at that moment, knowing that that was not a lawful order, I was consenting to the use of force. And that as an American, I was forbidden to do that. And this may sound really weird, but my grandmother passed away recently, and tiny Faye Goldman. She was like less than 5 feet tall, miniature human being, but a very great powerhouse of love for justice and love for this country. And now I'm getting teary, but I'll just tell you about Faye. She, was the daughter of people who had fled the Tsar's Russia. So she knew about your house being broken into by thugs in the middle of the night, and unjust laws, and people being harmed or burned or sold off into the Tsar's army. And she loved this country. She loved this country. And her whole life, She was a very proper lady. She wore white gloves. She was always making sure, she wanted me to wear a slip. She was so respectable. She, taught in a college. She was a proper lady. She wasn't an anarchist flamethrower. But she marched for everything that she believed in. She marched against the war in Vietnam. She marched against the nuclear bomb. She marched for civil rights. And she did it because she loved this country and its freedoms. And she said to me that we don't have a choice about marching for the things we believe in if we live in America, because she said activism is the rent that you pay to live in a democracy. She said that over and over. You don't have a choice. It's a privilege to live here, and this is the rent that you pay. So this may sound really weird, but I felt my grandmother there with me at that moment. And I felt like I couldn't do what he was telling me to do. So at that, I hesitated that half second, and he made a gesture, and I felt my arms pulled back behind my back, and my hands cuffed with plastic handcuffs. And I saw that my boyfriend, too, was surrounded, and his arms were pulled back, and he was cuffed with plastic handcuffs. And we were both moved bodily by a group of police away from everything and into the back of a police van. And I asked one officer if I could have a lawyer accompany me, because there were legal aid lawyers, National Lawyers Guild lawyers there. And he said yes, which was true. And then another not so good cop said no, which was not true. But I shouted to the crowd, please tell the lawyers to meet us at the precinct. So we were put in the back of a van, and we were driven away, not to the first precinct, which would have been the right one. But by that time, they were getting phone calls, I think, that this was an arrest under scrutiny. So they changed course, and they drove us to the 7th precinct, far across town. Meanwhile, I understand later that all the protesters had gone to the 1st precinct with the lawyers, had been misinformed about where we were deliberately, which is, I think, very disturbing, because you don't get to hold people in detention and not be accountable for their whereabouts in America, even for a little while. We arrived at the 7th precinct. Everyone was very courteous to us. Pardon me, this clearly was, they were getting it that this was a complicated arrest. And they took our possessions, and they put us into adjoining cells, and they closed the bars behind me, and I could hear Arron was in that cell next to us, next to me. And that cell, it was another very profound moment being in that cell by myself, even for a very brief time. It had either feces or blood on the wall. And apart from that, I really felt, like I felt this before, but I really felt it very profoundly when I was sitting in that cell. I've heard from activists all over the world since I've been doing this work, in places that don't have the rule of law and don't have a constitution like ours. And I realized when I was sitting there that the only thing separating me and Avram from those people in Yemen, in Uganda, in places all over the world, in the occupied territories, in Afghanistan, where people get disappeared or people get tortured. The only thing different, it's the same cell, it's the same construct, we were behind bars. The only difference was the rule of law and the Constitution. I could feel it like, I'm sorry to get so emotional. I literally, I was behind bars, I literally could feel it like a little thread, like a little shining thread or mist extending like light, throwing out light from somewhere, into that kind of grimy precinct, into that dark hallway, into my cell, keeping me safe. Because there was a process. People would find me. People were still accountable. I would get out. I would have my day in court. They couldn't just take me away. They couldn't just disappear me. They couldn't just hurt me. There was still the rule of law protecting me. The cell was the same. The difference was the rule of law and the Constitution. So they did release us. Before they released us, Sergeant, again very sweetly, came to give us the following talk. He said, this time we're releasing you with a summons. I said, what for? He said, disobeying a lawful order. I said, but I didn't break the law. And he didn't dispute that, but he said that it was a safety issue, and that whenever a police officer deems that it's a safety issue, they can arrest someone no matter what the law says. And I said, well, then what keeps anything from being called a safety issue? And he didn't answer that, but referred me to a section of the criminal code. And he said, I'm going to let you go. We're going to let you go now with a summons, but if you go back and join your friends, the protesters, and you get arrested, the next time it'll be a real arrest. And if that happens, and he pointed at the camera behind me, he said, there's a camera, and it'll take your picture. And he pointed at a machine, he said, there's a fingerprint machine. It'll take your fingerprints. And he said, this data will get fed into a federal database, and it'll be with you forever. And I said, okay, officer, if tonight I got arrested after I had established what the law was and then complied with it, how will I avoid getting arrested a second time? And he pondered that. And he said, well, and I said, for instance, I've been asked to speak to these protesters in the future. How will I speak and be sure to not get arrested? Because I actually don't want to get arrested. I'm the mother of 2 kids. I have a job. You know, I've got stuff I have to do. I'm not trying to get myself arrested. That's why I'm trying to obey the law, right? That's why I found out what the law was, so I could obey it, so I could get to my business meeting and home to my family. And I said, you know, I obeyed the law tonight, and that didn't protect me. And he said, well, if you speak to them, try not to say anything that could be construed as inciting a riot. I'm like, you know, I'm like scared to, you know, ski. So I said, well, what would that sound like? And he said, well, and he didn't give me any examples of what inciting a riot sounds like, but he said, well, if a guy, meaning a police officer, is in the audience and there's more than 10 people, and he thinks, she sounds like she's inciting a riot, you could get arrested. So I thanked him and took my possessions back. My boyfriend took his possessions back, and we were free to go. We have to show up in court on January 5th, but we walked out into the night air. And that's the end of that story, with one weird and creepy proviso, which is that after I got home, citizen reporters who were at the event told me that they had all gone to the first precinct, but that they couldn't get near it because all of Erickson Street had been closed off by the New York Police Department. And they were letting people in business suits pass, but not the protesters who were coming to find us and make sure we were okay and represent us. And the people asked the police, what's this? And the police said, Homeland Security froze the street. You know, God bless you for understanding what that sentence means. I don't need to explain to you why that's so scary, right? You get it. I mean, I could elaborate. Homeland Security, federal agency, our founders intended us to have civil policing, municipal policing. What it means is that without a natural disaster, you know, 2 middle-aged Jews arrested for walking in the street, right? Homeland Security deems it necessary to close off a section of Manhattan. They can do it to the middle of Chicago. They can do it to this community here. They can do it whenever they want, wherever they want, for whatever reason. That's what the law says now. There's one little coda to this story. I researched what permit was it that forbade us to walk on the street, and I discovered that it was a red carpet event permit, which says nothing about pedestrian access, except that what it specifies is that the red carpet people have to make sure they're not blocking pedestrian access. So the permit actually guarantees that we should have the right to walk on the street. All right. Thank you for listening. I feel very purged. This is very cathartic. Thank you. Thank you. So now I should connect what happened to me and Avram, two random citizens, with the larger situation that affects us all. In my book, The End of America, I talked about how there's a blueprint for closing an open society. And I'm going to assume that many of you are familiar with it, so I'll go fast. But you should know what these steps are. What I found is that there are 10 steps that would-be dictators always use to close down a democracy. Again, it doesn't matter if these tyrants are on the left or on the right, it's always the same steps. Because it turns out that it's pretty easy to close a democracy. It's not rocket science. And so for 4 years now, I've been predicting what's going to happen. And it's not because I'm a genius. I'm not especially prophetic. It's because it's so easy to foretell. If number 8 is control the press, and in 2007, they were making sure Dan Rather lost his job when he did a hard-hitting piece on George Bush. I could have told you that a New York City journalist would be arrested on the street for walking back and forth with her boyfriend. I wouldn't have assumed it would be this soon, but that is the future. But each of these steps are predictive. The first is that you invoke a terrifying internal and external threat. It can be a real threat, but you hype it. The terror threat is real, but countries like England and France and Spain have fought equally and in some ways more serious terror threats than the ones that we have, not that ours is trivial. And they've done so without destroying civil society. In fact, in Spain, they try their accused terrorists in open court and document the proceedings online because they know that sustaining democracy and civil society is the best way to fight terrorism. Feel free to cheer. Thank you. The second step is that when you want to close a democracy, you always create a gulag, or secret prisons where torture takes place. In Germany, they did this. In Mussolini's Italy, they did it. In Argentina in the 70s, they did it. In China, they did it. All over the world. This is step number 2. So we have Guantanamo. When I wrote End of America, other people were being kidnapped, held without trial, tortured. And Americans mostly shrugged. Why should we worry about it? These are the worst of the worst, right? And it's far away. But I crisscrossed the country saying, look at history. They always start with the other. They start with the gypsies, the communists, the union leaders, the anarchists, the Jews, right? And then sooner or later, there's this tipping point. When societies accept this, and they did in Germany in the 30s, they did in Italy at the late 20s, in the late teens and early 20s, there's a moment when these same people, these same thugs, come for people at the center of civil society. The journalists, the editors, the professors, the priests. And at that moment, civil society stops. You still have shells of it. You still have courts, and you still have elections. And you even still have arts and media and newspapers, but you don't have freedom. And it happens so fast. You see this again and again. So today, 4 years, 5 years after I wrote that book, the American president has said it's legal, he's entitled to assassinate Americans without trial, and has done so. Anywhere. And you know that the law now gives the president the power to call any of us sitting here, no matter what we've done or haven't done, a terrorist, which means the president can assassinate any American anywhere without due trial if we don't change things, due process. You create a thug caste, mercenaries, who are not part of civil society policing. So the brilliant founders of our country created the Second Amendment, which called for well-regulated militias. This means the National Guard. Who does the National Guard report to? The governors, the people, us. They're our people. They protect us. The founders did this because they knew what it was like to have mercenaries, German and British mercenaries breaking into people's homes without warrant, searching through their possessions, taking their stuff, frightening their children and their wives and their men. And so this is why we have this. You don't have military policing in America. Well, now Blackwater has opened a giant facility in Illinois, and there's another one in South Carolina, and there's another one in San Diego. And there are people at protests like the G20 in Pittsburgh who are reporting again and again that unmarked police officers are showing up with no identification and being more abusive and more violent than any of the municipal police who are accountable to the local people. Do you understand the seriousness of that? And Homeland Security is merging and synchronizing with local policing. This is happening in Manhattan as well. Not accountable to the people, not what our founders intended, terrifying. Brown shirts, black shirts. This is not an exaggeration, this is tactically what happens. Surveillance is the fourth step. In every closing society, you get a system that spies on citizens, innocent citizens. East Germany, again, Nazi Germany. The Patriot Acts are closely modeled on the wording of something called the Enabling Acts in Germany that gave the state the right or the power to read people's mail, listen in on their phone calls. Obama, this whole attack I made in 2007 in the End of America was against Bush. It's not partisan. Obama is making it worse. He's making it worse. And he's making it worse because no American president is free at this point to buck these powerful interests that see great profit, billions and trillions of dollars in maintaining a security state, a surveillance state, and now 8 wars of choice around the world that the American people did not vote for. As of last week, we have a new one in Uganda. Remember what the Constitution says? You're not supposed to be able to make a war if the people don't tell their congressperson that they want that war to take place. A surveillance system. The 5th step is that you harass citizens groups. And I don't need to tell you more about that. There have been so many documented instances of infiltrators, of provocateurs, infiltrating peaceful citizens groups. Then the next step is arbitrary detention and release. Again and again in a closing society, you'll start to see the police going for well-known individuals in the community and taking them in for questioning them, releasing them, taking them in, releasing them, taking them in, releasing them. It's an intimidation tactic, not just for the person involved, but for the people watching. The 7th step is that you target key individuals, and people start to lose their jobs, start to lose their livelihoods. Dixie Chicks, again, Dan Rather. People start to have real punishments for going against the group in power. The 8th step is you start to control the press and harass journalists. I mean, Amy Goodman was arrested last year, and many reporters now routinely assume that their communications are being surveilled. By the way, targeting key individuals, have you noticed how many politicians recently have been brought down in sex scandals? This is the result of a surveillance society. All of us have secrets, and they're not criminal secrets, they're just secrets. Whether it's an infidelity or a battle with alcoholism or a bipolar illness that we're taking medication for, or, we're gay and we don't want to tell people, or, we have a conversation with our accountant that might not be criminal, but might not be a good idea to release. In a surveillance society, you intimidate elected representatives by just getting that information and going to them and saying, here's this information. What was Eliot Spitzer doing when his career went up in flames, when this information was released about the prostitute? He was investigating fraud at AIG, this giant corporate entity. And it has been documented that he was under surveillance and that that's how they got him. The next step is that you start to say dissent equals treason. You start calling activists terrorists. You start saying that protest and dissent are sabotage or threats to national security. And across America, we're seeing environmental activists, peace activists, labeled as terrorists. I met a young man in the Midwest last year whose sister is facing a 15-year jail sentence for being an environmental activist who's been called a terrorist. And this name is expanding and expanding. Dissent equals treason. Martial law is the last step. You suspend the rule of law. And this is really interesting because this is kind of, I don't want to be like a total Cassandra, but this is kind of the moment that we're at. You don't have to have a violent coup to close a democracy. You just have to start ignoring the law. Mussolini didn't have to violently overthrow Rome. He just started to wait for the parliament to understand that they kept legislating and legislating and he was paying no attention, right? Because he had the force, he had the black shirts, the black shirts behind him. So that's what's happening now. The rule of law is increasingly meaningless. The United States is signatory to treaties against torture and for certain kinds of accountability that's simply ignoring. The police are simply making stuff up in communities across the country. People are simply, the Attorney General is simply not investigating, as he's legally bound to, criminal acts by people who've engaged in torture. The rule of law, out the window. So this is a very dark spiral. And now I'm going to switch it around, and I have to be super fast. There is a great deal of light now. You know, this talk was called Empowerment 101. And I want to tell you that just like it's pretty easy to close an open society, it is easy to reopen a closing society, okay? It is easy. What it isn't is easy to do with a handful of people. It is easy to do with great numbers of people, all right? So I'm going to tell you fast what your job is, what the founders said. What is democracy? What is America? America is, number one, the habit of freedom, right? We think, oh, what do we do, right, to sustain freedom? But the first thing that we have to do is in our heads and our hearts. And what I mean is when people live in a closed society, their brains adjust around fear. And so they start to internalize that they have no right to ask questions or to have a decision-making role in the state. And the thing we're learning about the brain is the brain actually reconfigures itself around people's thoughts. So the more you think you're powerless, the more powerless you become. Turning that around, what I'm so excited to see with the grassroots movements across the political spectrum is that people are starting to act like Americans again. They're starting to wake up and think, wait a minute, I think I have the right to be here in downtown Chicago, even if I'm told that I don't. And wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't leave it to the pundits and the Congress people and the think tank people to lead this country. The founders intended for me and you and ordinary people to be the decision makers in this country. That's a shift. And from that psychological shift, the great reclamation follows. So the number two thing, as I said when I opened this talk, you have to do to reopen our democracy is protest. But not just any protest. You have to protest, as I said, peacefully. You have to protest not covering your face, because provocateurs cover their faces. And if you don't cover your face, it's harder for a provocateur to get in there and make things violent. You have to protest singing. As I said, in Estonia, at the height of the Cold War, they liberated their country and brought down Soviet control of their nation by standing in groups spontaneously in public squares, singing the forbidden Estonian national anthem. They just sang. And then the crowd singing grew, and they grew, and they grew. And they grew to a point that the Soviet tanks and military were scared to enter into that crowd. And it wasn't, and this is a spiritual thing, it wasn't that they were armed. Something happens when a group of people stand up for themselves peacefully. Somehow, I can't explain this, and I think it's spiritual. I'm not proselytizing, I'm not asking you to believe me. But history shows that a force field shifts somehow. I can't explain it, but it happens again and again. And the people of Estonia then, non-violently, reclaimed their country, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, by parking their cars along a highway that connected all three countries and just standing there holding hands so that nothing could pass. When you stop traffic, when you stop business as usual peacefully, you are so powerful because nothing can get done. Capitalism can't get done. Militarism can't get done. I'm not equating them. But business as usual cannot get done. You have power. The other thing that holds America together is respect for the rule of law. So when ordinary citizens start to say, I'm going to find out what the law is, I'm going to educate myself, I'm going to call the National Lawyers Guild, Center for Constitutional Rights, ACLU, it's my law. And then go to the police, go to the news sources, ask the questions, shine a light. When you take back the responsibility for loving the rule of law with all of your eyes and all of your minds, and there are millions of them, the law comes back to life. That's a promise. That's how history works. The last thing that defines America is religious freedom. This is not insignificant. There's been a growing encroachment in our military, especially, of one religion, a state religion. In this country, the founders had fled religious persecution. And the essential American thing, in addition to freedom of speech, is freedom of religion. So what does that mean? It means that you're not quiet when they drag away the Muslim guy. Even though you think it won't happen to me, I'm a white Christian or whatever, a white Jew. You're not quiet about it because you know that if he doesn't have his freedom and she doesn't have his freedom, you don't have your freedom either. And the last thing that makes us Americans is this essential belief in equality. And I don't mean leveling of outcomes or leveling of resources. I mean the essential dignity of all people. That's the American insight. And what that means is that when you leave here, you remember all the time, just because that person has more money or more education or higher status or they're in the news or they have a gun, that doesn't make them more right than I am. Doesn't make them more right. Thank you. Thank you. So in conclusion, and then I will take questions, the skill sets you need, and I'll just throw them out there, and then what I'm going to do when I leave here is I'm working with a team to create video modules so that we can release these and they can hopefully go viral, teaching these basic skill sets back to Americans, right? Because if Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party or any of these grassroots movements is going to really put citizens back in the decision-making role, they need to relearn some stuff. Okay? Like the most exciting thing about Occupy Wall Street isn't their agenda, which I don't necessarily support all of, or some of, or much of, God bless them. It's not their agenda. The important thing about them is that people are coming face to face again and creating networks and communities, and that's a basis for a real revolution if they organize. So the first thing you need to do is protest well. I've told you how to do that. The second thing you need to learn, or we need to learn, is how to organize, like run a meeting. Not an easy thing to do. Young people, I want to warn you about something. You've inherited from the New Left a bias against leadership. and toward consensus, bad legacy. Bad legacy. I promise you, I have watched for 30 years wonderful movements subside into dust by the elusive and holy grail-like search for consensus. It doesn't exist, and it's kind of a fascist thing itself. It is. It is. Because you know what? Thinking people aren't going to reach consensus about everything. That's the nature of democracy. And so you have to get used to the idea that in a group, in an organization, you can have a vote. And that in a vote, someone will win. You can structure it so that it's, progressive democracy, if you like, progressive decision-making. But someone's going to win. Or an outcome is going to be most popular. And not everyone will be happy. And that is okay. Okay? And that's what you can build coalitions for as well. You don't have to agree with everyone. You can build coalitions around certain actions. Is that clear? Ignore the consensus nonsense. Bad, bad, bad. All right. Leadership. The left has created a discourse around leadership that it's negative and patriarchal and oppressive, and they're always tearing down leaders. Please, I beg you, and I'm talking to the young people especially, disabuse yourselves of this. This is nonsense. Nonsense. What you need to do is distinguish between traditional, retro, top-down, oppressive models of leadership, which do suck. I don't dispute that, right? You don't want to be part of that. But look to so many models of leadership, like Gandhi, like Dr. King, like Rosa Parks, where people are shining a light for others and drawing other people's energies and wishes and channeling other people's will for the good of everybody. There is a leadership of love. There is a leadership of respect. And some people have skill sets that let them do that effectively on everybody's behalf. So find those people, or you may be those people, and there are many ways to lead. You don't have to be the person at the head of the phalanx or in the national media. But don't be scared of growing leaders and being a leader yourself. And those people who are voted appropriately as leaders for these movements, please give them media skills, train them, and we'll create a module for you about how to do that. Train them to speak in good sound bites, simple messaging, inclusive messaging, talking in language that everyone understands. The left has lost us for years because we speak in PC gobbledygook. Pardon me. Don't be scared of leadership. Learn about the leadership of love. And finally, money. The left, unfortunately, the legacy of the new left, which comes out of Marxism, rather than out of the great Enlightenment movements of the 18th century, which should be our legacy, it taught young people right now a real distrust of money. This is a big mistake. Money is neutral. It's energy, right? What we need to do is teach young people how to use money for good. And these movements especially need to learn how to fundraise, how to put money in escrow, how to use money responsibly, because money is power in this culture. And when we saw stories that Occupy Wall Street had $300,000, suddenly it's like, oh, this is a movement. Well, you imagine if everyone in America who cared about prosecuting fraud on Wall Street gave $50 to the entity that would make that happen, we would get change. So we have to learn to use money, grow money, build money, fundraise, treat money responsibly, and redeem it for social good. Not be scared of it, okay? Creates change. And finally, the last thing I want you to do is think about the nature of what American power is and what it means to be Americans. Someone asked me this afternoon, if we did the kinds of things that I'm calling for, isn't the risk that America would lose its empire and its power overseas and would lose its status as the most powerful nation on earth? And I thought about that. It was a good question. And I thought about England. And England is a tiny country, and it used to be the biggest empire in the world. And it lost its empire. All those people had revolutions, and they kicked the occupiers out. And now England isn't beating people around the world into submission. But England is like number 4, number 5 for wealth and stability and influence, and way up there ahead of us right now in terms of the richness of its democracy and civil society. What's wealth? What's power? What's wealth? What's power? At one time, America, when it was new, was a tiny little country with barely a military. Jefferson had warned the founders against entanglement in foreign affairs, foreign wars, and it was barely hacking a living out of the wilderness. But the power of this ideal, the power of this example that people were coming together on the edge of a wilderness and saying, we're going to create a society where people are free in their homes from search and seizure, free in the street, free to protest, free to assemble, free to worship. That example swept over the entire world and changed it. That is power. That is our legacy. That is might. That is wealth. And that is what we need to reclaim as Americans. That's our inheritance. So let's leave here with that in our hearts, and then nothing can stop us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
If you have a question, please come out to the sides. Judy and I are in the aisles. If you could come out here and stand, that would be great. Go ahead.
Is there any evidence that the Patriot Act was pre-written and ready to go before an event triggered it?
Is it okay? Can I walk around with my very own microphone and sort of get close to the audience? Is that all right? Or does that make you feel like disempowered? No, it's okay.
No, it would be a relief.
Thank you. It helps me. So can I ask your name? You don't have to give it to me if you don't want to. Bill, okay. I realize I probably shouldn't do that because you never know. Bill, this is a really good question. The question was, is there evidence that the Patriot Act was printed and ready to go before 9/11? I believe that's been well documented. I can't give you a source, and I'm always warning people as a journalist to double source things to make sure they're correct. But that's my understanding from non-ridiculous sources that it was ready. Well, think about it. It's gigantic. I had the Patriot Act printed when I was writing End of America. It's like 580 pages. I could barely lift it. It was heavier than a baby, you know? And you can't make that up overnight, you know, between sort of 9/11 and the issuing of the Patriot Act, which was, I believe, like a couple of months later at the most, 8 weeks, yeah. A giant, giant piece of work. And I have to say what's creepy, I refer you to the End of America, there are literal echoes of whole sentences in the Patriot Act and the Enabling Acts of 1933 in Berlin. Yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, I guess this is not such a great idea, maybe. I guess I do need can you, yeah.
I'm not a fear-monger by any means, but I'm really curious in your opinion as to what, say we just handed over all of our rights as Americans to these people who want them.
Who do you mean?
Whoever's writing the Patriot Act, whoever's writing, you know, these powerful, rich, insanely powerful people, whoever they are, behind the curtain or wherever, say they got what they wanted, right. What would that look like?
Thank you, that's a good question. I love this community. What do you have in the water here? Seriously, people ask questions that go right to the root of the issue rather than hovering at the symptoms. You make me work really hard, but it's very, very impressive. That's a great question. And it came up earlier today, and the answer I gave was China. And this is what I mean. I didn't spell this out here, but the driver of this push is economic. I spelled it out a little bit. One of those machines that takes your nudie picture at the airport, right? How much does one of those cost? Do you want to guess? $1.3 million each each. And there's been an outcry about those machines, so I never see them anymore, except in like Arizona, right? And wow, there's a giant police officer. Are you for my protection? Are you protecting someone else from me? Or maybe you're just a citizen. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Anyway, so who got the contract for selling the hundreds or dozens of $1.3 million each machines? A guy who used to run the Department of Homeland Security, or who was a senior official. So there's a revolving door now, and they're all just making giant sums, as is Halliburton, Boeing, and so on. So in a closed society that is capitalist, right, like China, elites do really, really well. Corporations do really, really well. People do okay financially. They just don't have any freedom. And the driver is, capitalism is hard. It's hard to compete with someone in a free market. I've become a much more hardy free market capitalist since I've learned how uncapitalist our current system is. I like a good social welfare net, but it's hard to be an effective capitalist and make a lot of money. But if you are an oligarchy and you and your friends control the laws, control the legislature, control the competition, control the outcome, and keep consumers from saying, what do you mean I have to sign a contract for 2 years to get phone service that in England you can get for $10 a month without signing a contract, right? And you intimidate people who try to start organizations that do things like that, it's much easier to make gazillions of dollars. So that's the model. It's also very lucrative to surveil people. These surveillance technologies are themselves a giant market. So you hype the terror threat. It's lucrative to go to war in Uganda for oil. It's lucrative to go to war in Afghanistan. Why do they keep saying it's a 10-year war? It's a 20-year war. We're building a, football field-sized presence in Iraq. Did we vote for that? No. Is it called for by the actual national security situation in those battlefields? No. They're being built because of the ginormous sums that are made by building them. That's the reality. And if you interview former military or current military, they will tell you that off the record. Sadly. My heart goes out to our military, men and women, these brave men and women. They join the military to protect this nation and put their lives on the line out of patriotism. And then they say to me things like, now that I know what I know, I fight for my colleagues. That's what I'm fighting for, because I know I'm not fighting for my country. Yeah. So China is the answer. Yeah, and we don't want to, we don't want that. Right. Yeah. Questions?
Mine is a little simpler. I write a weekly newsletter for a local domestic violence shelter, and I was hoping to quote your grandmother, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
And I didn't know if she was Faye with an E or without an E.
Oh, that's so sweet. It's without an E. Okay. It's so sweet. Oh my God. She'll be so happy wherever she is. Oh, causing trouble in heaven, I'm sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the work you're doing.
I write plays on different men and women in history as role models for students. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've seen a real change in the emphasis. Well, actually, there's been a de-emphasis of history over the past 5 or 6 years especially. Textbooks are also being rewritten. Principal told me...
Can you hear this important point? Can everyone hear the speaker?
A principal told me the other day that the new textbooks coming out don't even mention freedom of religion as one of the reasons that the first settlers came to the United States.
Oh my
He just told me that last week. So,
oh my gosh.
And some colleges are not even requiring a history course to get a college degree anymore. So there's been a real de-emphasis of history, math and science and technology. But if our children don't learn our history, anything we do today will not continue, because they will lose that perspective. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any ideas of what we can do as adults to combat that problem?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I won't keep demanding people's names, but I just want to like personally thank all of you for these incredible questions. Yeah, you've put your finger on something incredibly important, and thank you for the work you're doing as well. Your teaching it's a really important thing to do. This is systemic. The No Child Left Behind legislation, it did, raise rote learning time, and people have complained about that. But one thing it also did is crowded out history and civics. So now, and what?
I'm just heartily agreeing.
Thank you. I love that. She's not even a relative. I love that. So, and I believe this was deliberate. So now half of 8th graders have never been taught civics. And there's a study that 50% of freshmen at selective colleges can't describe the nation's system of government, right? So it's very easy to undermine democracy if you raise a generation that literally doesn't know what it is, because they weren't taught it. Those boring classes in 8th grade about the separation of powers and how does a bill become a law, that's the lifeblood of how young people know when their rights are being violated. And you talk to young people today and they say, well, doesn't the government have the right to surveil us? Because it's to keep everybody safe. They've never been taught about the Fourth Amendment or the First Amendment. And about history being wiped out, I would be very interested for an investigative reporter to look into the influences behind the scenes of that wiping out of the record of religious freedom. Because, of course, we know that there's a strong, organized push to politicize and to religiousize our textbooks in our public schools. Yeah. Right. Exactly. You're totally right. And so there is something concrete we can do about this, which is civics. We have to bring back civics and history. And so you can organize your community to introduce a bill in your community to bring back civics. And there's an organization, which I don't have the name of off the top of my head, that is, I believe, headed by Sandra Day O'Connor, that is pushing to make civics obligatory nationwide. It's the #1 thing you can do, civics and history. Yeah. Sorry? High civics? iCivics. Thank you. This is what I love. Like, all the answers are right here among our own citizens. We don't need anyone else, just each other. Yeah, anything else?
Yeah, Naomi, my name is Butch.
Hi, Butch.
Can I hold it? Be easier. I can hold it. Thank you very much. I need to walk around too because I'm nervous.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And waiting here.
I'm sorry.
My question is more of an observation and a question because of Wall Street, the world is together on something.
Yeah, right?
The world is together on something.
It's well put.
The other thing, though, that I've noticed is that, many of the people that are being questioned about this, why are you out here? Why are you doing this? Well, the fact of it is, and I talked to somebody earlier, we're unhappy.
I'm sorry.
We're very unhappy.
Yeah.
But we have brought it to light in this world. Mm-hmm. It's happening all over the world. Everybody knows about Wall Street now.
So did you want to just make that point?
Well, I want to make that point, and I want to say, what can we do now? How can we build on this?
How do we build on it, right?
And really build on it to the extent to where, we make it happen.
Right.
So,
That's great. Thank you, Butch. I appreciate that. And it's a really important thing to say because just a few corporations now control most of our media. So there are 2 stories about protest in America. One is there are a bunch of motley eccentrics, right? There's the weird story and the impotent story. They're a bunch of weirdos, or they can't perform. They're incompetent, they don't know how to do it, they're not effective. And it's always one or the other. So I routinely go to British and European newspapers to find out what's happening down the block. because they're giving this organization, this movement, a great deal more serious attention. What we can do, let me refer you to Give Me Liberty, because there are 55 concrete action steps, and so citizens have to kind of choose their thing. No one can do all of them, and you should do what draws you and what you're good at. But it could be you need to learn to write an op-ed, which I teach you to do in the book, and this will be in the video series as well, so that you can regularly send op-eds and blogs to the media so that you're the media, not General Electric. You must document what's happening. Take your video cameras and your cameras and document the police. Keep an eye on them. Learn about the laws of your community. Run for office, which I teach you to do, or register voters and then use that registration list to pressure your representative, which I teach you to do. Apparently, if you register 30 voters and you say you'll get out the vote or not in congressional elections, not four-year elections, you have as much power as a lobbyist. Yeah, I have this firsthand from the Hill. You can document government abuses by requesting FOIAs. You can learn how to write a press release for events that you organize. Simply doing things that you care about in your community with your neighbors is itself building on this, because what's happened to us in the last decade especially is we've been encouraged to go home and watch television or be on the computer, instead of face-to-face learning how to do things with each other. And so if you like gardens, and you organize your group to garden, and you decide to find out if you can have more community gardens, and you find out about the legislative process in your municipality to do that, that brings life into it. What we're like is like a body and the limbs have gone to sleep. And the more everybody just pays attention and takes that one little step to do the democratic thing that is part of being a citizen, then all these eyes are on the process. And then people can't get away with the stuff that they're getting away with when there are no eyes on the process. The most important thing you can do is scrutinize and publicize. And that's why I'm excited about, I keep saying the Occupy Wall Street movement, its agenda isn't important. If all those millions of eyes are just watching Wall Street and reporting, and showing up at shareholder meetings, showing up in boardrooms, showing up in town council meetings, just being there where the goddamn smoke screen is relied upon, it will be much harder for these people to get away with what they're getting away with. All this corruption took place because we, for 30 years, have been brainwashed by this mantra that government is evil, it's not your business, private, everything's done better privately. Government can be terrible, but if it's working properly, it's just us, right? In a democracy, it's us and our neighbors. That's the government. Okay? So eyes on them, report, shine a light. Like, why am I standing here talking to you about my arrest? The way I was raised, that's something you do before breakfast, and then you forget about it, for the rest of the day, because everyone's going out and protesting and getting arrested. I can't believe this is a big deal, and I just talked to Rosie O'Donnell about my stupid arrest, right? But we're in a time where that's so unusual and weird, and it was scary, and I'm here talking and talking. Why am I doing this? I would be doing it if I was talking to two people, because I know that it's when you tell the story of the abuse, that's when you push back. And also, it's very important in a closing society to show that you're not scared. Yeah, and it's especially important for millions of us to show that we're not scared, because that scares them. The thing is, tyrants are bullies, and when they see, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 people sitting there day after day, they get scared. Not of violence, but of being uncovered, Especially if they're doing criminal things. And there is the rule of law. Scary. Sorry. Okay, quickly. I'm sorry, another question.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm a student here. After all those wonderful questions, mine kind of seems off topic.
Oh, never apologize, dear. Just spit it out.
Okay, what is your opinion about the riots in Greece? What do you think about them? What do you think they could do better, or do you think they have a grounds for their riots?
I haven't followed the latest eruption of the riots. I know they're rioting. What's the latest that I should know about?
No, I'm just saying that they've started rioting again, and it's gotten active again. There were businesses closed recently. I think I read yesterday about how businesses were shut down. They were interrupting things. The airport stopped working for the day, and all the flights were disrupted in the country.
Interesting. Wow. Interesting. What do I think about it? I mean, first, I know from citizen reporting from Greece that there are agents provocateurs among the Greek rioters. I mean, they are everywhere. And these ones are called the known unknowns by Greek protesters because they keep showing up and being violent. So I wouldn't necessarily be sure that the violence is all being done by Greek citizens. I guess what I feel, I'm always saying make it nonviolent. Don't destroy property, make it nonviolent. They don't have to, destroy things. That said, make it impossible for airplanes to take off or make it impossible for traffic to move, it's powerful. If it's aimed at a legitimate goal. I don't believe in anarchy I don't believe in anarchy. I believe in social order. But these people are having decisions being made that they did not vote for in a democracy that they, do not feel represents them, that they have no say in. And I don't know the law in Greece. I believe people should obey the law if at all possible. But if they have a right to assemble and their assembly is disruptive to business as usual, Martin Luther King said something really wonderful about protest. When people said, oh no, if you protest in Birmingham, if you protest this way or that way, it'll cause trouble and upset and people would be unhappy. He said the thing protest is supposed to do is to bring things that are buried and hidden that are not okay to the surface because then they can be dealt with. So if people are protesting en masse in Greece, it means something's wrong that needs to be dealt with. So I would say keep it nonviolent, keep it peaceful, keep it disruptive, and have good solutions for when you negotiate with Parliament. Yeah. The thing that is not okay, I think, is to just disrupt civil society and not have solutions and not be part of the solution. Yeah. Yes,
Just
please.
have time for one more question over there.
Hi, Naomi. You already answered my question about what we can do, but I have a question, your opinion. When we were taken to Iraq from the Bush and Cheney administration, everybody, the media was asleep at the wheel. Now, do you think that was because the networks were corporate owned, or what do you see the reasoning behind that?
It had to do mostly, I think, with a very clever tactic the Bush administration used that earlier administrations, and I was sort of present at the Clinton administration because I was married to a Clinton speechwriter, and then, of course, in the Gore campaign. Previous administrations talked to the press, even if the press doesn't like them, because they felt they have to, because it's democracy. They didn't always talk equally to the press, but the Bush administration literally would not talk to people who were critical of it. So the reporters were put in a position of, I can't write anything negative about the president or else I won't get any story and my competitors will be given the story. That was a big reason. I think you also can't ignore, how can I put this? 9/11, right? I keep talking about the brain, the amygdala. Are you familiar with it? It's the reptile brain. It's the flight or fight, freak out part of the brain that doesn't engage in higher reasoning. 9/11 made everyone go into this reptile brain thing of, will I survive? And the Bush administration created a discourse in which if you were critical of it, you were jeopardizing the survival of America. So that creates this consensus reality where people who are even members of the press fear reporting something negative because they'll be in this kind of treasonous role in relation to this freaked out community. And it's the job of the press, it's the job of the civil society and of citizens, especially at times of high freak out, high scariness, high crisis, to will our thinking to the neocortex, which is where higher reasoning is, and continue. I mean, this is why I say stay calm. When you're arrested, stay calm. Be peaceful, be peaceful. It's not just to role model effective protest. It's also so you don't become an animal, right? And so you can stay thoughtful and let thoughtful things happen. That's what's supposed to happen in a civil society. You're deliberative, right? You don't just turn into warring tribes where you just want to kill people who say, well, maybe the leader has something wrong with him or is doing something wrong. So that doesn't exonerate the press, but at all. It explains it. It's still a criminal negligence on the part of the press. The press is supposed to be the neocortex when everyone else is in the reptile brain. All right, do we have time? Yeah. It's okay with me if it's okay. Oh, this person has a question, she's upset. Or let's see what he says, yeah.
One of the biggest debates that I have in my life is when I go into the voting booth, do I vote for somebody who can get elected? Do I go pragmatic? Or do I go idealistic and vote what's really in my heart, even if they're, a third party that has such a slim shot at winning? I wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, the voting booth is one of those sacred places. I think you have to do what calls you. I mean, I was really mad at my friends and family who were Nader voters because here we are. But did they do the wrong thing morally? Probably not. I guess I sort of feel like everything is broken, so that's like the least of our problems, and that it almost doesn't matter what you do in the voting booth right now until we fix the systemic problem with the rest of the disconnect. Because the guys and women were voting in and out really are owned by the same people. So that's the thing to fix. Do I need to? Yeah, please. It's fine with me. I'm happy to be here all night, but I don't want to intrude on the schedule that my hosts have set. Okay, let me take him, let me take you, and let me be mindful of if Elmhurst is getting jumpy. Okay, we're good. Go ahead.
I have come to believe that the CIA has become a semi-international murder squad.
I'm not. Am I arguing with you?
No. But what really upsets me now is that General Petraeus, a former combat commander, is now the head of the CIA.
Right.
Would you speak to that issue?
I mean, I think you just spoke to it. What do you want to say about it?
I wanted to bring it up.
Oh, okay.
I think it's bad.
I think it's bad as well. I think it's bad as well. Look, the CIA is not supposed to be an assassination squad. It's not supposed to be a military entity. I'm not one of these lefties who think, I'm not even sure I'm a lefty anymore. I just care about the Constitution. There's a reason to have intelligence. There's a reason to have spies. There were spies in the formative years of our nation. In a real working democracy, countries would still have intelligence gathering because you need to know what's going on. Valerie Plame is a spy who is a friend of mine and whom I admire so much. And there are very brave people in the CIA who sign on to serve their country and put their lives at risk to find out what's happening so that we can be safe and make good geopolitical decisions. But no, the CIA is not supposed to be an assassination arm. And in fact, there have been laws in place, I believe since the 70s, to make sure that they wouldn't be an assassination arm. It's actually been illegal to assassinate foreign leaders. And that's another chunk of our precious separation of powers and restraints and rule of law that's been thrown out the window. So it's scary, it's creepy, it's awful, and it's unconscionable. And let's put a stop to it. I'm with you. Yes, you wanted to say something.
Okay. My name is Pam, and I, like most people here, am very excited about. It's an exciting time to live.
Oh, that's a good attitude.
Well, because of this emergence of grassroots movements across the world. Yeah. Very exciting. But you mentioned the importance of leadership. And what worries me is I'm watching what's happening in the Middle East, in Egypt. They are wrestling with leadership. And as in Libya with Gaddafi going down, who himself rebelled and took over. How do we prevent that from happening again? And how do you define leadership?
Okay. So did everyone hear her? Is there a question back there about what the speaker said? She's saying, talk about the issue of leadership, and in Egypt they're struggling with that. Gaddafi, there's vacuum of leadership. You're not going to like what I have to say. Maybe you will. It's none of our business. Right. Okay. All right. She's saying here. She's saying she's worried when she looks around the room, but what do we do about the vacuum of leadership here? Well, excitingly, I think that there's enough of a vestige of people's memory of what it means to be Americans that there's a tremendous richness of potential leadership here, but that they need training. They just need training. So I don't, like right in this room, I'm sure if, I did a thing that I sometimes do in talks and say, okay, what are the needs of this community? Who has resources? That this one's working with battered women, this one's teaching history, this one's, in this room, there are leaders who are solving all kinds of problems in this community and perhaps in larger communities. So one thing that happens in America right now is the media spotlight is withheld from grassroots leaders. But that's why I always say it's so important to make your own media. Don't wait for ABC and NBC. Make your own media. Be your own pundits. That's why I'm always talking about training people to create media. I don't see any dearth of leadership in America. I see a dearth of education of the skills of leadership. But the potential's right there. And they're learning fast. Don't worry. Don't worry. But they do need to identify some people. I agree, there is a vacuum. Yeah. Yes. One other person over there was concerned, this lady. Yeah, yes ma'am. Super brief.
Can I ask you 3 things? No. Is that fine? Oh. Okay, I'm a Hispanic, but I'm from Puerto Rico, so as you all know, probably, Puerto Ricans have American citizenship. I've been in this country 20 years, and I've been the subject of constant harassment, especially by cops. I've been stopped non-stop. When I first got here I came in via Texas. I was stopped in Virginia because I was going fast, it's true. I was taken to a courthouse and put in a holding cell, and I was told to strip naked. This is really happened. Yes, this was in Arlington, Virginia. These were Arlington cops. Arlington cops. The only reason I got out is because I actually live with a girlfriend who was a lawyer, and she called in and she said, if you don't let her go, you're gonna get in real trouble. That's the only reason but what I'm trying... Oh, I'm sorry. What I'm trying to ask you here is, this has been many times, not just once, and you just mentioned that in your, talking points. How do we fight police that's literally, well, I don't know if this is corruption, but how do you fight this back? I mean, I've had this happen so many times to me.
You've been told to strip naked more than once?
Well, no, that one was that one time, but I've had other types of harassment.
Okay. All right. I hear you. I believe you. So first, there is such thing as racial profiling in this country. Some of the emails I've been getting that, again, make me cry. I'm sorry. I'm crying a lot, recently. I don't mean to. So many African-American men have emailed me lovely emails saying, now you know what it's like to be black, And I don't know what it's like to be very black because they only kept me for half an hour. But... what happened to me is nothing new for people of color in this country, and especially for African American males in this country. I'm very well aware that it's my being a bougie white woman who lives in the village is part of why I don't get pulled over and, treated the way you've just described. The most important thing you can do if you've experienced police illegality or brutality, and I don't mean to single out the police, I admire the police for the most part. They're very honorable, wonderful people who also put their lives at risk every day. But if you're mistreated by anybody in a position of power, document and publicize. Document and publicize. The best thing you can do is, as you said, call a lawyer right away. The ACLU, National Lawyers Guild, CCR. Give all your money to them. They are your army, okay? You can't, for Christmas, don't ask for the iPod. Just ask all your friends, send money to the National Lawyers Guild, CCR, ACLU. They're who we need. They're your lawyers if you get arrested or abused or mistreated. The other thing you have to do is you have to start being reporters and learning how to be journalists. Every American citizen needs to learn to be a journalist, and it's not that hard. Again, we'll make a module of this. But that means that you get the facts of what happened to you, get as many names and identifiers as possible, location, date, you write it up in a narrative, completely accurate, don't embellish, don't use inflammatory rhetoric, don't call names, write it up, say how it made you feel, 850 words, send it to your local newspaper or to the New York Times op-ed page or the Wall Street Journal op-ed page. You think you have to be a big expert to write for these people. They're desperate. I know these editors. They're desperate for ordinary people from all walks of life with their experiences to write op-eds and send them in. Spell check, make it grammatical, have someone read it if you're not sure it's grammatical. Send it in with your name and your email and your phone number, and be ready if you get a call to edit it within 24 hours. Okay? But do that at your local paper. Send it to the Huffington Post. Call your local TV news station. Learn to write a press release, right? Say what happened to you. Document it. And if there's an organization, go online. The internet makes all this very easy. There is probably an organization, whatever mistreatment you've experienced, that is there to help you. So call them and ask for their help, okay? But the number one thing, it's also psychological. Whether you get recourse or not, like you may not get a giant settlement or even an apology, but you won't internalize your victim status. Even if your fight is completely fruitless in terms of an outcome, it's not fruitless because you've acted like a human being with dignity and rights, and that's what it means to be an American. And on that note, I think I have to close it up. But thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. 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 Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf, for taking this time to come to Elmhurst College for such an educational and insightful experience. Your words call for all of us, regardless of our passions, our studies, and our backgrounds, to stand up for this country and its future, because that is what is common amongst all of us. So many times, people will wait on others to make the changes. Oh, we won't worry because the next generation will fix it, the next president will fix it, the next great activist will fix it. But it's time to stop waiting on others. Take initiative and start making these changes right now. So thank you for giving us this motivation and the tools to start making those changes. I would like to present you with a gift on behalf of Elmhurst College.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
A bit of housekeeping. Ms. Wolf has kindly agreed to sign her books following her presentation. Books are still available for purchase in the chapel narthex. Please form a single line in the center aisle if you are interested in having Ms. Wolf sign your book. I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening and encourage you to attend the Meaning of Democracy and Civic Engagement, which will be presented by Senator Mark Kirk on Sunday, November 6th at 7 p.m. here in Hammersmith Memorial Chapel. For information on this and other upcoming college events, please visit our website at www.elmhurst.edu. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Our lectures are free, but they are not without costs. So if you've enjoyed tonight's lecture, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution to the Friends of the Arts at Elmhurst College. You can use the envelope in your program or hand your contribution to one of our students, the ones with the buckets in the lobby. We greatly appreciate your support. Have a safe trip home.